So I do think that the job market will change as a result of AI. The argument around AI versus human, or I'm going to just fire this human and have an AI do their job for them, a one-for-one replacement, I think that is categorically flawed. And I think it's flawed because no matter how good AI gets, and it's going to get good, it will always be absent of human judgment, core ethics, a grounding in intent, lived experience, and genuine expertise. And so without that, in the case of content, the content's pretty shallow, no matter how beautifully written it is. AI has the ability to make a lot of things easier. We also need to make sure that it makes things better. And that part, that's the human role.
Okay, we're here with Meghan Keaney Anderson. Meghan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm psyched to be here.
Awesome. Hey, I'd love to start off for the audience. Maybe just take a minute, introduce yourself and what led you to Jasper.
Yep. So my name is Meghan Keaney Anderson. I currently run marketing for Jasper, which is an AI platform that allows you to use generative AI to really accelerate your writing process. We've all had that feeling of hitting a wall, getting writer's block, needing to get over a hump when it comes to completing an article, or maybe after we've written an article, repackaging it into a bunch of different formats and tones and audiences. That's the kind of role that AI plays for marketers when they're using Jasper.
Being like on the bleeding edge of the hottest technology right now, maybe if you could share with us your excitement, like what are some of the major trends that you're seeing? What is AI primarily impacting? What are you excited for it to impact over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
So I'd argue that really the only thing that has ever held our ideas back has been our ability to convey them well and at scale. And I think that what excites me about AI as a tool for creatives and for marketers is it removes so much of that barrier in the way of getting your ideas out if you use it well. We think about the writing process and there's ideation, there's research, there's composition, there's editing, there's distribution. And so much of our time and energy today without AI goes to the composition part that we often ignore all the rest. If you can bring that composition bar down, you can reinvest that time into things like doing original interviews or original research, coming up with new angles, the stuff that really makes writing good. And so that's where I get excited, is when this can be a tool to make creatives and marketers and content roles better.
Awesome. And this thought on composition, there are content producers out there who probably that's one of the things that they're like, oh, that's my job. And I'm sure you're no stranger to the conversation that's happening right now. As they say, if it bleeds, it leads, right? There is so much fervor around like this fear-based, the robots are coming to take our jobs. AI is just one more signal of that. I think it was just about back in February, the World Economic Forum estimated about 80 million jobs would probably be displaced by AI and generative AI. While at the same time, the same report said 90 million jobs, I would argue probably over 100 million jobs are going to be created by this, right? What's your general POV on that? How do you respond to this fear mongering?
Anytime there is a technological shift as massive as I think AI is going to be, you're going to get a changing of the market as a result of that, right? New jobs are going to emerge. Some jobs that we relied on heavily before maybe not grow as fast or maybe change in their dynamic. So I do think that the job market will change as a result of AI. The argument around AI versus human, or I'm going to just fire this human and have an AI do their job for them, a one-for-one replacement, I think that is categorically flawed. And I think it's flawed because no matter how good AI gets, and it's going to get good, it will always be absent of human judgment, core ethics, a grounding in intent, lived experience, and genuine expertise. And so without that, then that, in the case of content, without that, the content's pretty shallow, no matter how beautifully written it is. I instead think about this as an accelerant for humans. I think about it as a tool that will make us better, more efficient, create space for new ideas, much in the same way that the digital camera didn't end photography or photographers. It created new formats of photography. It accelerated the process so that you could create new ideas coming out of that. So that's the role that I very much want AI to play in the future and believe that it should. It's up to us as managers, as business leaders, to recognize the necessity of humans in this equation.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of my biggest beefs about the whole AI movement is they buried the lead in that there's artificial intelligence, which is what we're like, oh, the replacement of humans. But there's also this component of that's one component. The other component is IA, intelligence augmentation, right?
Yes.
Taking our abilities and making it more. And I don't think there's enough conversation about that. So going down that vein, one of our theses here on the show is, right, that machines are freeing humans up to do more meaningful work. And really, if we think about it, we're relying on machines to do the more tactical, the more tedious parts of work, the more transactional components of work, the more objective components of work. And it's shifting our reliance on humans to do the more relational parts of work, the more subjective parts of work. So when we think about this, what would your response to be to the question, like, what kind of work do you think humans are going to be left to do, say, 20 years from now?
Yeah. So if you take my own industry, marketing, I think about what roles are going to become more important in light of this transformational technology and how we can equip people to set up well for those roles. So the funny thing to me is right now, AI is very trendy. Lots of people are talking about it and everybody's guessing where it's going to go. And so one of the hot jobs that people think AI is going to create is the prompt engineer. And I could be wrong. I don't think that's right because I think the technology is going to get so good that you don't need to do so much engineering around the prompts. But B, I think we're missing the point here. I think that the jobs that are going to become more important are actually some of the oldest jobs in the book. The editor, the person who goes out and finds the stories, the person who evaluates, is there, who fact checks, who looks for things like misrepresentation and bias, who, takes the human elements of judgment and puts that back into the AI assisted content to make that content better. So yeah, I think the roles that are going to and should grow coming out of this are the roles that speak best to our nature as people.
Yeah, really great thought. If you were advising, you were speaking in front of the graduating class of college this year, and you were to say, for the next generation of workers, these are the type of skills and competencies that you should all seek to hone, to sharpen, what would those be?
It's interesting. I think I would tell them critical thinking, research. I would tell them study the humanities again. Let's make the humanities cool again. I think the things that flex our ability to think independently, to act creatively, to make connections among the information that's in front of us. Those are the types of skills that I think will be really important. And the relationship-based ones, when you're leveraging a bunch of automation, how do you communicate with your peers and deliver feedback in a way that is constructive? So again, I think that AI has the ability to make a lot of things easier. We also need to make sure that it makes things better. And that part about making it better, that's the human role to be able to look at something that is blended and automated and say, that's not good enough, or we can elevate that in these ways.
I was having this conversation yesterday with Liz Wilkie, who's principal economist at Gusto. And do you know Liz?
I know Gusto. I really know Gusto's marketing.
Right. And they have 200,000 small businesses and they're looking at she's a labor economist. But we were chatting about this since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It was you had this advent of the assembly line, right? Before that, it was almost like a knowledge economy. It was doing a lot, but you had to know about things. And then the assembly line came and it was more a doing economy. And we're seeing this oscillation between knowing and doing. What you were just talking about, you were saying critical thinking, creative, knowledge worker. Economists say we've been in knowledge work for 50 years. I actually argue that we've been in a doing economy for the last 20. We use the internet and now we're doing a lot of things.
Yeah.
And now it's actually we're going to be shifting. The pendulum's going to swing for the next 20 years will probably be more of a knowing economy. Just curious to get your thoughts on that. Does that seem about right? Or how do you think of this oscillation between knowing and doing and the impact that AI is having?
Yeah, I really like that way of thinking about it, that we missed a shift that happened back to the doing economy, and that now is a time to reemerge and have independent thought come out again. I think there is a risk in over reliance on AI or any of these automated tools that we use them and shut off our brains because it's easier. I think that the better way to think about that is use them to accelerate yourself, but your own thinking, your humanness, your judgment is ever more important. Like, I worry about the use of AI in things like mortgage applications or in things like determining health treatment or insurance coverage. I even worry about it in search a little bit if we don't also step up and have that critical thinking to say, okay, I'm going to take this input from AI, but I'm not going to take it without questioning. I'm not going to take it without doing that gut check to say, does that feel right to what the actual correct path forward is? So I think we got work to do ahead of us as humans, as people, as professionals. I think we have been doing the mindless work thing for a little bit, where we're even just like the way we consume the internet and information around us today, there's not a lot of questioning or digging deeper. I think we will get so much farther with this tremendous, powerful tech if we turn that part back on.
Yeah. And there's even just news this week from like an ethics standpoint, right? Like pioneers in AI saying, hey, put the brakes on, let's figure out what's happening. There's the same thing in robotics. If you're going through any robotics program in college, now there's like a whole ethics, right? I guess what can you maybe just explain for our audience the implications of this technology and why there is this focus on the ethical implications?
Yeah. So earlier this week, there was a group of technology leaders, including some AI learning model leaders, got together and said, look, we need to make significantly more progress in setting some ethical standards and some regulation and some safety protocols around this technology that is developing so quickly. And raising the question of, hey, do we pause development until we can do that? Can we do these two streams at the same time? And I think that the reason why there is such a call around ethics and safety and regulation is because we, I think, are rightly learning from the last phase of this kind of breakout technology where internet and social media came around, and there really wasn't a lot of discussion in the early days around, hey, what does it mean when you can take a message and get it out to millions and millions of people before you ever can fact check it? What does that mean for society? What are the long-term effects of that? And there are the same amplifying aspects of AI. So the people that, government leaders in academia, leaders in AI and technology, that like all across the spectrum are really right now calling for, hey, we can't make the mistakes with this one and then go back and repair it. We need to make progress right now as we're building this thing on setting some standards.
Yeah, fascinating. And so it delays, in some ways, the progress or the speed in which these technologies can get adopted. And I'm always fascinated by that too. Like, AI isn't new.
No, yeah.
The industry has been working on it for the last 20 years, 25 years. How do you think about that evolution going forward and the impact of AI? And there's so much, oh my God, everything's going to change today. The reality is, once the signals settle, are you thinking more in AI's impact, or even robotics as well, whatever, just your general view? Is it like we should think about it in 5-year chunks, 10-year chunks, 30-year chunks? Like, when will we be able to say, wow, it has really made a huge impact?
So the time frame and the pace of impact here, I think the thing that is making everybody sit up a little bit and making the hairs on their arms stand up, because it is fast. It's faster than prior technological leaps, as every technological leap has been faster than the one that came before it. We're talking about major leaps forward in capacity in the span of a few months, 6 months at a time. It did take a long time to get to this point of acceleration. There were musicians creating music with AI in the 80s. And long before that, AI has been a science. But right now, the rate of compute and the rate of development of what this technology can do is lightning fast. We've seen a lot of discussion. We have not seen the same pace in like action for thinking about the broader role that this can, should, or should not play in society and in business and in our own personal relationships. And so there's just a lot to unpack. The tech can move very quickly. Our brains are still human, so we still have to like see and learn and experience the job. So I think there's a mismatch there that everybody's recognized, and we're just trying to evolve as quickly as we can.
Yeah. And that's a good place where, concern and fear, right? It can breed those feelings. And you mentioned relationships, right? When we think about work and we think about a lot of the fear mongering that is happening, really what I think it speaks to is this tension in the employee-employer relationship and the general stigma or mistrust of the corporate big business. I'm a little person. I'm also one to go out there and say, I personally believe, that the employee-employer relationship is broken to some extent.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that statement? What do you attribute to your beliefs?
So I understand why there's a kind of distrust between the corporate and the employee side of things when it comes to adopting a technology like this. I think very often the reaction to something like this, it runs to different ends of two poles. It's either this thing is scary and I don't want anything to do with it, or this thing is amazing and it's magic and it's going to change everything for the better. And the reality is it's just a tool, right? And it should be put in its place as just a tool somewhere in the middle. But there's risk when people are sitting at either ends of those poles. And so I think a lot of the tension right now is a distrust between employees and the corporations that they work for and figuring out where they sit in that spectrum. And it's because the incentives are not aligned, right? At a person-to-person level, CEO is just a person. A copywriter is just a person. At a person-to-person level, you can develop trust there. You can know that somebody has your best interest at heart. But the incentive model for businesses has been to operate more efficiently. And so you can't blame a employee of that business to get concerned. That incentive will outweigh the incentive of keeping human judgment and experience and impact in an organization, because those are inherently harder as yet to measure, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where that comes from. It's just, there's just a gap there in the incentive models that makes people concerned. And that's why there's a ton of education that needs to happen here on both sides. But I think especially at the business level, to let people know that this is not, you have to know what AI is and what it is not.
Yes.
And you cannot throw out something of immense value just because one is easier to measure than the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Using that, right, and shifting a little bit, you said operating more efficiently, which I think it's really good time to talk about how we think about performance.
Yeah.
First off, would just love to get your take running marketing at a tech company. One of the things the pandemic has shown us is that as business leaders and businesses generally are just woefully unprepared to create this sense of culture and high performance in a distributed environment. Never mind fractional workers, which we'll get into in a second, because I know you probably have an opinion there. But how should leaders be approaching looking at how to measure and drive performance in today's day of hybrid, messy work?
So I think in this world, we're going to need to reevaluate everything. We're going to need to think about the ways that we measure our success. We're going to need to think about the ways that we train and measure our employees. And so I think that if I were to provide guidance in how to do that, and knowing that this is all rapidly evolving, the thing that I would point to is what has long been the advice, which is measure outcomes, not the 100 little things along the way that lead to those outcomes. When remote culture first came into the corporate space, there was a lot of concern around, don't know if my employees are going to do a good job if I can't see them in their seat from 9 to 5 every day. And the advice there was measure outcomes. You'll know if they're doing a good job based on what their work produces, right? I think the advice is similar here in this hybrid, automated human world where you could have that same panic as a boss to say, how do I know? Very simple example, like I hired a blogger. How do I know that they're not just having AI do all of their work? Shouldn't I ban those tools? The same advice I would give them is look at the quality of the writing, the substance of it that's coming out. Now, AI may be able to get you really high quality writing, but the substance is going to need people, right? And so measure on those outcomes, and that don't get so distracted by every little way you used to measure outputs, basically.
Sure. So when it comes to quality in that context, do you think there are general standards that people are applying across business or across, let's say, the role of the writer that anyone can understand what good quality looks like?
I think herein lies the increased importance of the editor to understand what does a good piece of content look like, not just based on their gut, but based on their understanding of standards of good content strategy, what they know about how Google interprets or how search engines interpret good quality, the strength of research. When you underinvest in research, your writers are going to brainy quote and Statistica to pull stats and inject them and make it look like they've got good research in their articles. A good editor will be able to spot that and say, that's not acceptable research. You need to go out, conduct your own studies, or find well-reputed studies to include in this piece. It is the subjective stuff that's going to get more important, and the skill around evaluation of what good really is that we're going to need to invest in and hold to a higher esteem.
And we're now more than ever outsourcing freelance, fractional work.
Yeah.
I'm curious with your vantage point, because I know a lot of the freelance and fractional work community uses Jasper.
Yeah.
What's your take on this? Do you think, I would love asking our guests this question, do you think it's possible to build a company of 100% freelance or fractional workers?
Such a good question. And I think it's a tough question to answer because you have to first look at what is it that makes a company great and a team great. And so to me, that's level of skill. It's the culture and the communication that comes with being part of a collective working towards something. It is the accountability and the experience that grows over time. Now, I think that could you accumulate all that with a collection of fractional and freelance employees? I think you could, but you have to be intentional about that, right? I think that you have to know, you have to invest in, look, I'm going to have a fractional CMO and freelance writers, but part of the time that I'm paying them for is connecting and discussing and getting a strategy together and not just order taking back and forth. So I think it doesn't just happen naturally. I think that it's harder to do that. I'm not going to rule out that you can, but that's how I think about it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. My general thought on that is if you can build something on 100% fractional or freelance, chances are you probably have a great product, right? You're able to build a product, you're able to sell it. The moment that you need not half of someone's time, but all their time, now they're on your team, right? Yeah. So you're probably going to build 2, 3, 4 products, and eventually you'll find your way into having like the definition of a company is the collective that all shares the same passion and movement. But there are definitely in my conversations 2 schools of thought out there. Somebody's absolutely, and other people like more in your camp, like not going to rule it out.
Yeah, I think the idea is there's something really powerful about a collective of people all working towards the same thing with common understandings and diverse expertise.
Yep.
And I think that if you can find that and create that in a collection of freelancers and fractional employees, that's great.
Yeah.
I think it's sometimes easier to do that when you've got that long-term full-time employee.
On this track, we're talking about freelance and fractional work. I think it's actually paving the way for revolutionizing the employee-employer contract. Upwork recently announced that now you can even do like full-time contractors on their platform. There's also a lot more union activity recently than there's been in the past.
Yeah.
What do you think this says about the future of at-will employment?
I think that employees need a couple of foundational fundamental things in order to live and work and have good work-life balance, right? We all want flexibility. And so that makes freelance fractional work very attractive. We want the ability to move and to change things up and to have diversity in our own lives. That makes that really attractive. But there are also fundamental needs, like in the United States, healthcare, development of your own skills, fairness, and the ability to negotiate for higher salaries or to have rights in your employment. So I think where we struggle right now, we're in an in-between stage where the gig economy, freelance is having this moment that I think is really empowering in many ways, where you don't have to be tied to one company and you can have the flexibility. We just also need to make sure that that other part of the equation comes with it, and that we're investing in the true contract, the human contract with these people, in my opinion, so that they can have both flexibility and security. That's the dream, is the Venn diagram between those two things. And I think there's some innovative stuff happening that can help us get there. There are freelance networks now. Brain Trust is a good example of one, that they provide healthcare to their freelancers. They provide like dollars for development. They actually have equity and like a stake in, it's a blockchain-based company, but they have a stake in the freelance network. And so there's some interesting experiments happening in that space that I think makes me excited about where this could go.
You mentioned just in your talk track there that there are some elements when you're not a contractor for a company that are perks you may not get. Well, healthcare is a foundational need. And I know here in the US, that's all another story, but career development, right? Now, clearly, if there's, at least now we have this surge in freelance and fractional work and those people attempting to do it, one could make the case that there's more people than ever that are probably out there subsidizing their own career development and trying to take it into their own hands. We were chatting before this, right? But even these are things that are traditionally we have to rely on the business to do. And what I think is so sad about that is then we just follow the jobs that give us these opportunities, but then we probably end up on a path that if we were to pave it out from the beginning, would have never been.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot of pigeonholing happen. So it seems like that the time is right for this ownership exchange of let me take control over my career. But do you think that we'll start to see a shift more to these like direct to worker career development services? Or do you think that the economies of scale just aren't there?
I don't know. I can't predict where that's going to go. I really like your point on this, though, of the trade-off of having career development be part of a track within a company. Is it so tied to that track? Whereas if you take ownership of it yourself and you have the freedom to do that, then you can pick a little bit from here and a little bit from here, and you can become a really well-rounded person and professional. And so there's something really attractive about that. It's tough for me to say where the market is going to go in terms of, it certainly looks like there's a surgence of freelance and fractional now that's happening. And so that interests me. And I want to study that and understand. I think I know what's behind it, but I want to understand what routes it can take. It's just tough to be able to say it's definitely going to be the new way of work or not at this point.
We are at time. This has been awesome.
Good.
I highlighted some good nuggets. Is there anything that you would like to share with the audience that you wanted to talk about that we didn't have a chance to?
I think I'm good. And I actually have a hard stop. So I think I have to go.